Gonzaga joining the Pac-12 might have made the Memphis Tigers reconsider, which could lead to a basketball super league being formed out west.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, place your first $5 bet, and you will get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, the NCAA tournament will be back in Spokane in 2027, although the Zags will not be the host team. Speaking of Gonzaga, their non-conference schedule, it's complete. Maybe. There was a noticeable absence on Gonzaga's non-conference schedule release. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the NCAA tournament being in Spokane. But first, let's talk about the new Pac-12. Gonzaga officially joins the Pac-12 conference starting in 2026. The announcement comes out on Tuesday. Here we are, barely 48 hours later, and we're already wondering what's next. What is the Pac-12's next move? Does Gonzaga joining the Pac-12 alter or shift in any way the potential targets that the Pac-12 is going to consider? And does Gonzaga joining the Pac-12 potentially alter those particular schools' interest level in the Pac-12? And I'm here to tell you, yeah, we don't know exactly how much, but we know to some extent that this is happening. And I'll read you a quote here. This is a source speaking to John Wilner. For those of you who don't know, John Wilner is a prominent reporter covering the Pac-12 conference. He and former guest of the podcast, John Canzano, are the two kind of most well-known reporters covering the Pac-12 conference. Wilner tweeted, quote, this is from a source. They said this to Wilner. Gonzaga changed the chessboard, opened up some opportunities. Some of the schools previously linked to the conference are not fully off the table. Look at that, folks. Gonzaga swinging it around and making it seem like they have enough sway, enough cachet, enough oomph to potentially alter other teams' decision to join the Pac-12. We'll get into the specific team. Spoiler alert, it's the Memphis Tigers. We're going to talk about Memphis for most of this segment, but I think it's worth just sitting with that statement for a moment. Gonzaga, a school that still to this day, for those of you who saw Gonzaga's non-conference schedule release, there's people in the comments on social media like, oh, Gonzaga's going to, cakewalk from December to March. Like that is the incredibly tired, exhausting narrative about how Gonzaga just sleeps through their conference slate and gets lucky every year in the NCAA tournament. I mean, it's completely ridiculous at this point. It's been ridiculous for a while, but the fact that it's still being repeated is so silly because this person, the people who comment this, a lot of them are Pac-12 fans, and I'm like, your conference is feeling like this huge boost from Gonzaga joining the league. Like if you don't believe in Gonzaga for whatever reason, your conference does, the Pac-12 does. Not only does it believe in Gonzaga, it feels like it is adding Gonzaga has been a huge weight for them. It was a key move. Teresa Gold said it was a critical addition for the conference. And now you're seeing other schools potentially reconsidering whether they should join the conference because of a non-football school, because of a small Jesuit school buried in Spokane, Washington, a school that prior to Mark Few taking over as a head coach, there was legitimate concern they wouldn't be able to maintain their athletic departments at the Division I level. This is it is always worth pausing briefly to remember that. If the Gonzaga Bulldogs joining the Pac-12 conference, which in of itself is a statement that a lot of people who've been fans of Gonzaga for a long time really have always struggled to conceptualize that this would actually happen. If that happening is causing other prominent programs to reconsider because of how impactful Gonzaga joining the Pac-12 is, that's a pretty incredible testament to what this program has built over the last 2.5 decades. I'm going to read another tweet to you, this one about Memphis, since that is the primary topic today. This tweet comes from Hitman Hoops on Twitter. This is a Memphis-sourced person. I looked into their account, and it seems like they do break news periodically, so somebody who has some reputability. Tweeting this, they say, quote, Memphis and the Pac-12 remain in ongoing discussions, multiple sources confirmed. Discussions have started to, quote, ramp up again over the last few days, with the Pac-12 proposing creative solutions to ease Memphis's financial concerns. A report yesterday claimed Memphis was not in the picture, but I'm told that is not entirely accurate. And as a reminder, when Memphis initially turned down the Pac-12, they were pursued in the first round after the Pac-12 added the 4 schools from the big Mountain West. The first kind of next move for the Pac-12 was to pursue schools in the American Athletic Conference. Memphis was at the top of their list. We know Tulane in South Florida and UT San Antonio were pursued as well. And those schools eventually kind of locked in an agreement to stay in the AAC. But the Memphis athletic director was asked about this, and his quote was that he said, I said no to the Pac-12's offer. I did not say no to the Pac-12. And that feels incredibly relevant when considering Wilner's tweet indicating that Gonzaga has opened up additional opportunities, including former schools who are interested, and considering this tweet from Hitman Hoops, which indicates that Memphis and the Pac-12 are ramping up their discussions. When there's smoke, a lot of times there's fire. This doesn't mean that that Memphis is going to join the Pac-12, but it means that those talks seem to be coming back. And ostensibly, it means that Gonzaga joining the Pac-12 is part of the catalyst, part of the thing that jump-started continued conversations. Whether Memphis went back to the table and said, hey, we are now more interested in joining the conference because of Gonzaga's addition, or whether the Pac-12 went to Memphis and said, hey, we've added a big-time brand on the basketball side. We know that's a big deal for you. We want to reopen these conversations. What can we do for you to make this happen? And I'll be very clear. The Pac-12 needs Memphis. The Pac-12 needs Memphis more than I think Memphis needs the Pac-12. And I also think Memphis needs the Pac-12. The American Athletic Conference is not in a great spot right now. They're not. I don't think this is a good long-term sustainable place for Memphis to be. I think if they're choosing to stay in the AAC, it's because they believe strongly that they can get a better offer in the near future. And they might be right. Maybe the ACC, if Clemson and Florida State bounce, maybe they can snap up Memphis. Maybe the ACC falls apart. The Big 12 is part of their kind of cleaning up of the ACC. Maybe they sneak Memphis in there as well. There's a distinct possibility that Memphis finds an opportunity elsewhere. But it's a risk. It's a risk to stay where they are currently. And if the Pac-12, who needs a new school, here's the thing with the Pac-12, it's pretty simple. They have 3 priorities. Number 1, get to the minimum FBS eligible schools of 8. You need 8 full football members. That means you can't just add UConn's football team and let them house the rest of their sports in the Big East and call it good. That doesn't count. You need a full 8th member minimum to qualify as an FBS program or FBS conference in 2026. That's priority number 1. Priority number 2 is that football team's good. You don't want to just add bad football teams. There are schools out there that would happily join the Pac-12 that wouldn't move the needle for the conference very much. Sacramento State is making a huge push, and I think it's cool and great that Sacramento State's doing that, but they're not high on the Pac-12's wish list, nor should they be. The number 2 priority outside of just getting to that minimum number is getting a quality football brand that helps the football in the conference continue to improve, that raises the level of the football. Priority number 3 is adding a good men's basketball program. Those are the top 3 priorities for the Pac-12's next edition. Memphis is the only school that is currently believed to be available to the Pac-12 that fits all 3. They're the only one. If you think I'm wrong, if you think there's another school out there, please let me know, but I have scoured. I do not see it. There are other programs that might make some sense where they fit 2.5 of these things. Memphis checks all 3. There's cons with Memphis, certainly. There are some issues with the men's basketball team in terms of a seemingly decades-long inability to follow the rules. That is a problem for the Memphis Tigers. The football team has been a little bit inconsistent. It's not like they're dominant or any stretch like that. But by and large, Memphis checks a ton of boxes for the Pac-12. And I think that this is a conference that needs to figure out what exactly do we need to do to land you? What is it paying your huge exit fee from the American Athletic Conference? Is it a different revenue share that might, I don't know, like what does it look like? What could that possibly be? Pac-12 needs to have those conversations because this is the school that makes sense. From there, you figure it out. If the AAC starts to crumble and there's some cracks, maybe you then go after your Tulanes or your Tulsas or UT San Antonio. If the AAC mobilizes and stays together without Memphis, maybe you go for somebody else. Maybe it is Texas State. It's not great. It's not appealing on the basketball side all that much, but it gets the Pac-12 into Texas. It gets them another football school. Maybe you then start to pivot to basketball. I have a feeling the Pac-12 wants to be at more than the bare minimum 8 FBS teams, so I do think there will be at least 2 more football additions from where they are at currently. But maybe you look at Wichita State. Maybe you look at the schools, the local schools, St. Mary's, Grand Canyon. Maybe that's when that starts to happen. We'll have more conversations about that. We're going to talk about what that would mean for the WCC, what that would mean for other leagues around here. But at the end of the day, if the Pac-12 finds a way to get Memphis, just that conference alone, that's a top 5 basketball league in the NCAA. And some people are going to say it's controversial, and that's fair. The Big 12 is better. The Big East is better. The SEC is better. Then the conversation becomes, where does this conference, with Memphis, with Gonzaga, with San Diego State and Boise State and Colorado State, where does this conference stack up compared to the Big 10 and the ACC? I think most people would probably have them below both, which would be 6th. I think there's an argument they're there. I'm not super sold on the Big 10. We'll see what Purdue looks like without Zach Edey. We'll see what the new additions look like. I'm not a huge believer that Mick Cronin's suddenly going to turn it around, but hey, maybe he'll prove me wrong. We'll see. The point is, this conference is right in that conversation. And if this conference also adds St. Mary's and Grand Canyon and Wichita State, or if they go after schools in the A10 like Dayton or St. Louis, suddenly you're looking at a top 4 for sure basketball league in the country, a conference that's consistently putting 5, 6, 7 teams into the NCAA tournament. That's a massive jump from where Gonzaga is currently. I suspect eventually this conference is going to add programs that don't really move the needle for Gonzaga. Every addition from here on out is probably not going to be a big boost in men's basketball. Maybe it means it's Texas State, like we mentioned. Maybe it means it's Air Force if they can get them from the Mountain West, or maybe we get lucky and it's New Mexico and or Nevada who would help elevate the basketball in the league. We'll have to see. But the priority right now, unquestionably, for Teresa Gold and the Pac-12 officials should be doing whatever they can to land the Memphis Tigers. It's good on the football side of things, and it's great for Gonzaga and the basketball side of things. Well, we're going to talk about Gonzaga's non-conference schedule because the charity exhibition game against USC that we reported on a couple days ago wasn't on the schedule. What does that mean? We're going to discuss that and more coming up here in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, when you're going to hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you placed your bets. And you get started right now with $200 in bonus bets. That's guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. The Zags remain right now at plus 2,000 to bring home that national championship in 2025. Their odds have stayed pretty consistent. Some of the teams around them have moved around a bit. The Zags right now are tied with both North Carolina and Iowa State. They are ahead of both Arizona and Baylor, potential opponents for the Zags this year. We know Baylor's finalized. We're not sure if they're going to play Arizona, although I know many of you are hoping that is the case. That is FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, for what feels like the 6th, 7th, 8th time this year, we are talking non-conference scheduling for Gonzaga. The Zags routinely are one of the very last teams in all of college basketball to release their full non-conference slate. I think Mark Few and the Zags love to keep their options open, love to wait it out and see if they can get some last-minute games on the calendar. It certainly worked for them this year as they were able to finalize that game against the Baylor Bears, which will now be played on opening night for college basketball, November 4th at the Spokane Arena. But it's done. It's finalized. And I want to first acknowledge that the noticeable thing when looking at this schedule was not which games were on there, but which game in particular was not on there. Because there was an exhibition game listed. We'll talk about that in a second. But it was not the game reported a few days ago between Gonzaga and USC, part of a charity exhibition, raising money for a hospital in California. The game was slated to be on October 26th. And when Gonzaga released their non-conference schedule on social media and released a press release about the game on the official team's website, this game wasn't on there. I don't think it means much outside of the details are not finalized. What we'd heard was that it was going to be October 26th. It was going to be at I can't remember the name of the venue. I apologize. And that it was going to be, charity exhibition raised for a hospital in the area. It's possible that they're still ironing out those details, whether they're still working on the date for whatever reason, whether they're still working on the location. Who knows? It's also possible, we'd be remiss to not acknowledge that it might not happen. I don't know why it would have been reported a few days ago and then suddenly not happen. Something would have had to have changed in that period of time, but that happens. It could be the case where something just fell apart and they ended up deciding they're not going to end up doing the game. Gonzaga does have another exhibition, but that doesn't prevent them. They're allowed to have 2 exhibition games because they don't have any regular season games against non-Division I opponents. The way that it works is you're allowed to have either a secret scrimmage or exhibitions or non-D1 opponents in the regular season. Basically, you're allowed to have 2 of each. And so for Gonzaga right now, they have 1 exhibition game. And if this charity exhibition against USC happens, they will have 2. But they do not have any games scheduled. They're not playing Eastern Oregon in December like they've done in the past. They don't have any games officially on the calendar that are against non-D1 opponents. The exhibition game that is on the calendar is scheduled for October 30th, and it will be an exhibition against an NAIA school in Portland called Warner Pacific. And the reason that this game is significant in any way is that Warner Pacific's athletic director is none other than Matt Gregg, Ben Gregg's father. Very cool opportunity for him to have his team get a chance to play against his son and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Just a cool opportunity, a cool thing. We've seen this before. I believe Gonzaga's played Warner Pacific in the past, but otherwise we've seen when staff members are parents of Gonzaga players, we've seen them make an opportunity to try to play each other in those situations. It's just kind of a nice thing to do, especially for Gonzaga when they know they're going to play 1 or 2 of these non-D1 opponents year in and year out. And I don't want to say that they're all interchangeable. They're not necessarily, but when you have the opportunity to do it and also kind of, help out somebody who's integral to your program the way that Ben and Ben's father, Matt, is, you're going to do it. So why not? Why not bring Warner Pacific out to the kennel? Why not take them on in an exhibition game that doesn't count, that doesn't matter? It's a good opportunity for the Warner Pacific team. It's a good opportunity for Gonzaga. Matt Gregg was already talking about it on social media. He said, I think the Zags are going to be ready for Baylor now that they're playing Warner Pacific on October 30th. It's just kind of a fun, cheeky little thing that I think is good for college basketball. It's good for Gonzaga. It's the kind of thing that Mark Few and the staff like to do. And I think one of the kind of things that helps them kind of build that family atmosphere and continue to have strong relationships with their players, their student athletes, while they're there and while they're gone. And, it helps with recruiting and stuff like that too, to know that it's the kind of program that is willing to do those kinds of things. All right, let's get into the actual schedule here. We've talked about it quite a few times on the show. No real surprises, but for those of you who are new to the show, we're just going to run through it here quickly. The Zags are opening up the season November 4th. Against the Baylor Bears at the Spokane Arena. It is a neutral site game. It is a pseudo home game. I get very frustrated when folks call it a true road game for Scott Drew. It's not a true road game. It's a neutral site game. It's a pseudo road game, but it is not a true road game, just like it's not a true home game for Gonzaga. Regardless, that's not important. Gonzaga and Baylor are playing on the first day of the season. How spoiled are we? How lucky are we to get to watch that game on the first day of the season? 6 days later, Gonzaga will host Arizona State, another Big 12 school. That one will be a true home game for the Zags at the McCarthy Athletic Center. 5 days after that, November 15th, they will play UMass Lowell. Then 3 days after that is Gonzaga's first true road game, I believe only true road game of the offseason. That will be against San Diego State, November 18th, a future conference matchup. A little extra juice for that game because of that. I suspect, as many of you do, that Gonzaga and San Diego State is going to become a pretty consistent rivalry. If St. Mary's jumps and does join the WCC, the Zags will kind of have 2 rivals, 2.5 to 3 rivals, depending on how you consider Washington State. But I think this Gonzaga-San Diego State year in and year out is going to be real fun. After that, 2 days later, November 20th, the Zags host Long Beach State at the Kennel. Then they get about a week off before the battle for Atlantis, where they will play West Virginia in the first game. They will play either Indiana or Louisville in the second game. And then in the final game of the series, they will play one of Arizona, Providence, Oklahoma, and Davidson. And yeah, you bet. We all know who the Zags are hoping to play. We all know who we're hoping to play. We really want to see the fighting Steph Currys of Davidson. No, I'm kidding. Gonzaga at Arizona, that's the one. That's the game everybody's hoping for. It would be must-watch television for college basketball fans, for sports fans in general. What a storyline that would be if we get that game on November 29th. Then you get the real gauntlet. Kentucky, December 7th at the Climate Pledge Arena, followed by UConn at the Madison Square Garden on December 14th. Early December has been a murderer's row for Gonzaga historically, and boy, you can't do a whole lot better than playing Kentucky and UConn on back-to-back Saturdays in December. That is tremendous stuff from Mark Few and the Zags. Then they got another bye game, Nicholls State at the Kennel on December 18th. Another bye game after that, December 21st against Bucknell. Then they get a 7-day break for the holiday. They will play UCLA at the Intuit Dome on December 28th. They will be part of a 2-game series. The other game is Grand Canyon, San Diego. Both those games will be the first college basketball games played at the Intuit Dome, which is the new home of the Los Angeles Clippers. 2 days after that, Gonzaga plays Pepperdine on the road, and that is when the conference play begins. Unlike last year, Gonzaga will not have a non-conference game in the midst of the WCC season like they did last year against Kentucky. But this schedule, I mean, what more needs to be said? You got pair of Big 12 teams to kick things off with Baylor and Arizona State. You got a true road game against a very good San Diego State team. You're going to have potentially multiple NCAA tournament opponents in the battle for Atlantis. And then you got Kentucky, UConn, and UCLA all in the month of December. It just doesn't get any better than this, folks. That is it. It is an incredible, we can have conversations, maybe we will later this month, about if this is the best non-conference schedule Gonzaga has ever played. They've had some really good ones in the past, so I don't know if this quite stacks up there, but it's certainly in the conversation. It's a huge testament to Mark Few's willingness to play teams anywhere, anytime, any place, and the respect that other programs have for him to be willing to play them as well. Well, folks, the NCAA tournament coming back to Spokane in 2027. It's not going to be at the McCarthy Athletic Center where it was this last March. We're going to talk more about where it's going to be, what that means for the Zags, all coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're talking about the NCAA tournament. They've revealed where they're going to have their first and second round games for the next couple of years. They always are looking a couple of years in advance here. So today we saw, or I should say on Wednesday, we saw that they're going to have, they set out their schedules for 2027 and 2028. And it's going to be back in Spokane. In 2027, the first and second round games of the West Regional are going to be at the Spokane Arena, not at the McCarthy Athletic Center. Of course, as you recall, the NCAA tournament was at the McCarthy Athletic Center this past season. St. Mary's and Grand Canyon both played there. They played each other there. It was an epic 5-12 matchup. It's now a WCC matchup. The fact that one of the premier games in the NCAA tournament first round last year was a matchup between two teams that are now in the WCC at an arena by another WCC team, just proof that the West Coast Conference, I know Gonzaga's moving on to the Pac-12. Some of you are ready for me to be done loving on the WCC, but we got 2 more years. I'm going to keep loving on the WCC because I will continue to believe it is an underrated basketball conference. Admittedly, if Gonzaga, St. Mary's, and Grand Canyon leave, we'll have some conversations about what that means for the WCC, but they might not be as underrated at that point going forward. Regardless, Spokane has had a rich history of fun and successful NCAA tournament games on both the men's side and the women's side. Last year, not only seeing that epic game between Grand Canyon and St. Mary's, we also got to see Alabama. They ended up beating Grand Canyon, a game that I thought Bryce Drew could have maybe done some things a little differently in the second half that may have resulted in Grand Canyon pulling off a major upset against a team that ultimately went all the way to the Final Four. We also saw Yale, who Gonzaga played in the first game of the season. So Yale was familiar with the Kennel. They were ready for going into that environment. They went in, they knocked off a 4-seeded Auburn team, helped validate Gonzaga's non-conference slate last year a little bit. And it's just fun to see major upsets like that happen in Spokane. The games will be at the arena this year, which means that Gonzaga is not listed as the host school. The host school is actually the Idaho Vandals. It was fun seeing a lot of people very confused on social media of like, why is a game in Spokane being hosted by, why is the host school Idaho? Don't read into it too much. It's just not something that is particularly significant or important. It doesn't mean that they are convinced that Idaho is going to make the tournament and Gonzaga is not. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It's just the way that those things work. So we will see Spokane host NCAA tournament games on the men's side again in 2027. Again, it's part of the West Regional, which is in LA. The LA Regional is hosted by Pepperdine. again, more proof to maybe not take those host schools super seriously in terms of it meaning anything with regards to NCAA tournament success. 2028 doesn't have any games in Spokane, but the NCAA tournament will have games at the Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle, of course, hosted by Washington. No secrets there. Apologies to Seattle U, but Washington will be the host school for the first and second round games of the West Regional in 2028 at Climate Pledge Arena. The regional will take place at the Chase Center in San Francisco. And I thought presumably they would list San Francisco or maybe Cal or Stanford or somebody like that as the host. They just listed the WCC. I noticed a few other places had the Big 12 as a host and the A10 as a host. So apparently it's common to just have conferences be the host school instead of actually having a school. I don't know that it matters much, but it would have been nice to see San Francisco's logo there, especially since they play multiple games per year, including Gonzaga at the Chase Center. They're going to be playing Memphis there this year, which kind of bookends the show here, talking about Memphis again. They're going to play Gonzaga there as well. It's nice to see the Dons utilize the Chase Center well, and now seeing the NCAA tournament utilize the Chase Center only continues to help a school like San Francisco, who I think a lot of people have criticized San Francisco for being willing to play Gonzaga in these games. They make a lot of money from this game, and money for a smaller school like that is really important. And Chris Grillifson has indicated that the recruiting and just the excitement the players have for getting to play in an NBA arena is really important to them. So I think it's one of those things that makes a lot of sense why San Francisco would do that. And it's cool that there's going to be NCAA tournament games there in 2028. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. I want to thank all of you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I will be back on Friday. We're getting ready for craziness. Craziness in the Kennel is on Saturday. It is so soon from right now. So we're going to be talking previews, who we're expecting to see, what types of events we're going to see, some potential breakout candidates, all that stuff coming your way on Friday's episode. Then next week, we're continuing our player preview series. We're going to continue to talk conference realignment, continue to talk what Gonzaga going to the Pac-12 means, and keep you up to date on any new news we hear about who the Pac-12 might be adding going forward. Thanks for listening, folks. And until next time, as always, go Zags.